podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and the Pavilion. On today's show, we have a story that is both heartbreaking and heartwarming. That's a quote from our main guest, journalist and former newspaper editor, Aaron Gransby, who has just written a new book, The Fakenham Favourite. Aaron joins us to tell the story of Cool Roxy and the Blackmores, Alan and wife Pat, while Alan reflects on Cool Roxy's amazing career, a record 11 wins at Fakenham, and the difference training horses from his small yard in Little Berkhamsted made to his family's life, before retiring as a trainer at the age of 90, following a family tragedy. We are also joined by Cool Roxy's regular jockey Chris Honor, current jockey Tabitha Worsley, who rode for Alan, and trainer Georgie Howell, who recalls the incredible day when Roxy opened a racecourse bar. Welcome to the Paddock and the Pavilion, Aaron.
Hi, Stephen. Great to be with you.
Well, on today's podcast, we're going to talk about Alan Blackmore, Cool Roxy, and your new book, The Fakenham Favourite.
Yes, indeed. I'm looking forward to telling you more about all of those.
We also have help from two jockeys, Chris Honor and Tabitha Worsley, who both rode for Alan, a trainer in Georgie Howell, and, of course, Alan himself. Let's start with Alan and his life before he started training, Aaron. Not giving too much away about the Fakenham Favourite.
No, certainly, Stephen. Well, Alan's background was, you could say, in terms of his involvement with horses, it started off fairly conventionally. Both his grandparents and his parents had horses. Alan learned to ride from an early age. In fact, he found it more natural to be sitting on a horse than he did on a bicycle. But after that, it definitely diverged, and there was no sort of real involvement in the training setup at all until he actually started training, which was, relatively speaking, quite late in life, sort of around the time he was 50 years old. But he'd grown up in the North London area in Fry and Barnet, where he lived, with his parents and his brother. But then he was conscripted into the Royal Navy for a couple of years. And then after he left the Navy, he started working for his family business, which was actually making and selling dressmaking patterns from a factory and sales office in Russell Square in London.
Quite different from training.
Very different from training. Yeah, absolutely. And then after that business closed down in the late 1940s, he continued to do things very different from training because he went on to become a driving examiner, which he split with some time actually as a rally driver as well. So he was racing rally cars around the country and indeed around the world for about 5 years as well. And then after that, he became an exam invigilator. So yeah, it certainly wasn't a conventional background in terms of learning training. And I think one of the most impressive things about what Alan did throughout his training career is that he did everything his own way, and he learned how to do everything in his own way as well. He wasn't an assistant trainer somewhere or anything like that. He worked out what he wanted to do. He found the methods that worked for him, and he got on with it and made sure that looking after his horses and making sure his horses were able to be horses and to live very naturally was a very important part of everything he did.
Well, I think it's about time we actually heard from Alan to find out why he started training. And this is what Alan had to say.
My parents had always had horses. My grandparents had horses. And it was just part of our life, lifestyle. I rode from an early age. As I say, my parents always had horses, not necessarily to race on, but just go hunting and such like. And it was just part of a way of life,
Why did you become a permit trainer?
Well, because I thought there's no point in racing horses in a point-to-point for a few quid. Didn't even cover the travel costs. When you could be training for good prize money and do it properly and get good riders, it was all made worthwhile. And we loved doing it. I found everybody in the racing world always very nice to talk to. Top trainers didn't look down on you. They were also friendly.
In what year did Alan start training?
1977, he took out a national hunt permit, having trained his own point-to-pointers for a couple of years, which was remarkable in itself because he was basically training the pointers from effectively his back garden. So he'd moved into a house with his wife, Pat, into a village in Hertfordshire called Little Berkhamsted, which is just outside Hertford. And there was a small stable block next to the house, so the horses were based there. And then they actually had some land to roam around in just by the side of the house. So there are some photos in the book that show the horses rolling in a bit of sand, and literally right next to it is the back of the house and the back garden. So it was a very unusual setup. But he started training pointers. And I think Alan, being Alan, decided there just wasn't enough money in it, so he would be better off going for a permit to actually train national hunt horses, where he might have a chance of winning a bit of prize money. So that was what he did, and he started off from that. He always only had 2 or 3 horses in training at any one time, so it was a nicely sized setup that he could do with Pat helping him, and normally with one member of staff sort of coming in the mornings to help work ride and to muck out. But it seemed to work really, really well for them. And he started having good results and winners very, very quickly. So late 1970s, early 1980s, you had horses such as Silent Tango, Silent Echo, which was a really, really successful horse and won multiple times, and a couple of others such as Arsonist that did incredibly well and started to put him on the map despite his small beginnings.
So where were his gallops? Were they right near his house then?
Yeah, they used to do road work just all around the villages around Little Berkhamsted and Bayford on the edge of Hertford. And he had eventually he bought some land, which was about 100 yards up the road, which he then, about 10 years after he started training, actually built a purpose-built stable block there. And he had a little grass gallop there, where they were able to do some work. And then once if the weather wasn't great and they needed to do a bit more fast work somewhere, then he would take the horses down to gallops at Hadley Wood near Enfield. And for schooling, they would eventually go up to Newmarket to the schooling grounds as well. Although at home, he did have his own versions of hurdles and fences, which were a little bit more rudimentary, shall we say, in that he actually built them when he started using formica and covering them with old stair carpet and cushions.
He was clearly a natural, though, for someone who had a small stable.
Yeah, definitely. Say his own background, he'd ridden horses from a young age. Before he started training, he did ride in point-to-points. But where all of his ideas came from, I think, he just seemed to have a very sort of natural talent for working with horses. And he did always want them to have enjoyable lives, to be out pretty much all day in fields together. And I think the fact that he was able to have very happy horses helped ensure that they were always really ready and happy to get to run.
And reading the book, he was a keen supporter of young jockeys. Richard Dunwoody, who went on to win the Grand National and be champion jockey, he rode for Alan.
He did. Alan saw Richard Dunwoody riding in a point-to-point and really liked the way he rode and thought that he was definitely a young and up-and-coming talent. And he asked him to come and ride his horses. And he had enormous success with Richard, from a very, very early stage, which I'm sure, helped to stand him in good stead for his future career. But Alan continued to champion young jockeys all the way through his career, right up until the end of it. So I know on this podcast, you're speaking with Chris Honor, who's such a massive part of the Cool Roxy story. Chris rode Roxy in 70 of his 77 races, which I would love to try and find out if that is a record, but I think it's got to be. But also Jack Quinlan, Mark Goldstein, Tabitha Worsley, all fabulous riders who had chances early on with Alan and have gone on to do really, really well.
Well, as you say, his most famous horse was Cool Roxy. And I asked Alan about the story, how he came to buy Cool Roxy.
A couple of years earlier, I'd gone to the races at Stratford, and I saw this mare, Roxy River, win. She'd already won on the flat and 2 or 3 times over hurdles. And I had a good bet on her. And she came home and really fought. And I thought, that's a damn good mare. And when I saw in the sales catalogue, Cool Roxy wasn't called Cool Roxy, this foal by Roxy River, I was determined to buy that horse. And I was very lucky. It was one of the early lots, and most of the pin hookers were looking for the early type to get 2-year-olds. They weren't looking for horses with stamina. They didn't want them. And she had, by being by Ardros, there was plenty of stamina on the sire side too. And I liked the foal straight away. And even the auctioneer wouldn't put down the hammer, and I got it. He kept saying, come and look at this foal, gentlemen. Because he was striding out with his ears pricked, no fear at all, and looked a picture. And I got him, I think, for about 1,500 or something like that. And I was very lucky. Mary Rymel, who was a owner and seller, she rang me up and said I was disappointed with not getting more for my foal. And I said, don't you worry, he'll win prize money, and he'll win you breeders' prize money. They used to do that, and she, every time he won, she'd ring me up and say, I'm booking another holiday now, because she used to get about $2,000 each time. She was delighted in the end. I think she ended up in the long run, about 20 grand with breeders' prize money. So she was delighted in the end.
But Alan, hadn't you gone out to buy something else on that day?
Well, I wanted my wife not to know my real intentions, because I was going to take the horse box. And this was quite early in the morning, about 7 o'clock. I was leaving to go to Newmarket sales. And she said, where are you going? I said, I think we need a new fridge. Didn't you were saying you needed a new fridge? Well, I've got to take the horse box so I can get it, bring it home with me, you see. But instead of buying a fridge, I bought a foal. She was a little bit disappointed at first, but she soon fell in love with that horse. Funny enough, when I unloaded Cool Roxy and out of a horse box, the doctor was here because Pat had a problem with a stomach problem of an ulcer, and he'd come to visit her. Dr. Simbala, he was a very good doctor, and they were looking out of a bedroom window when I let the foal into our back paddock, and there was a sand ring there, and he came round jumping and leaping and standing on his hind legs and rolling in the sand. He said, how are you ever going to cope with a horse like that? And Pat said, oh, don't worry, we'll soon manage. And from day one, he was never, ever any trouble whatsoever. My wife loved him to bits because, he had ability, but he was such a kind horse, and everything we taught him, we never had to teach him twice. And he was a real superstar.
Did you ever buy that fridge?
No, I didn't. No, I made excuses. We'll manage with this old one.
It's not often you go to buy a fridge and you buy a foal at Newmarket sales, Aaron.
No, indeed, no. That's a typical Alan Blackmore one. Yeah. So that morning he decided he was going to go and bid for this foal, and he was determined to get him. And Pat, his wife, hadn't been feeling too well, so she had said to him, "Where are you going? Where are you going?" And Alan, in his own sort of typical way, just said, "Well, I'm going shopping." And Pat said, "Well, we need a new fridge." And he said, "Of course, dear." Off he went to get his horse box, telling her that he was going to get the horse box because the fridge was rather large and it would need a big conveyance to bring it back to the house. So that was a good one.
And Cool Roxy had a tremendous record, as you've detailed in your book, The Fakenham Favourite, at Fakenham.
Yeah, he really, really took to the course. He had a slow start, Roxy. He didn't get his first win for a couple of years, but that first win came over hurdles at Fakenham, and he went on to win in total 11 times at Fakenham, which is a record for the course, and I would think is unlikely to be beaten, certainly for some time, if not ever. And he won 5 races over hurdles. And so he was already a bit of a standing dish there, and the crowd had come to really adore him. And then at the age of 9, he went chasing for the first time, which, as many of your listeners will know, is quite a late age to send a horse over steeplechase fences for the first time. But Roxy's problem, if he had one, was that he was too consistent. So he was always going up in the handicap, never really being dropped very much. And it became very hard for him to be winning over hurdles. So Alan decided to put him over fences, and there was no better place for him to have his first introduction over fences than Fakenham. And guess what? He won very nicely on his first run over fences there as well. So he went on to continue to run there for many, many years, eventually winning 11 times, 5 over hurdles and 6 over fences, beating a record that had been held since the 1970s by Prince Carlton. So he really did become a bit of a local hero and a great favourite among the crowd there. And in fact, David Hunter, the excellent clerk of the course and chief executive of Fakenham, used to say that Roxy used to put thousands on the gate every time he ran.
And he was very small.
Yeah, he was only 15 but he had fantastic conformation, and I don't think he ever missed a day's training. He was remarkably healthy, remarkably fit. And he was one of those horses, and they come along every now and again, that can keep going. So he ran for 10 years. I honestly don't think he ever ran a bad race. He was a fabulous little horse. He's just so honest. He wore his heart on his sleeve every single time he went out there. And it didn't matter, although he had massive success at Fakenham, it didn't matter where he was running. He ran really well wherever he went. And he was always consistent and always up there. And, you would always, if you were backing him, you'd know you were always going to get a run for your money, whether he was 2-1 favourite at Fakenham or 40-1 outsider at Sandown, he would always run well for you.
I guess you were there on some of those days when Cool Roxy won at Fakenham.
I was there many times when Cool Roxy won at Fakenham, and I have to say, Stephen, I've been fortunate in following racing over the years to have been at some fabulous days. Absolutely superb days, even seeing Best Mate win his 3rd Gold Cup at Cheltenham. But I can honestly say that nothing gave me more pleasure than watching Roxy. He just had such an affinity with Fakenham, with the crowd there. He got on so well with Chris Honor in particular when he was riding him. And he was just one of those horses that you followed time after time after time, and you just desperately wanted him to win. And it was nothing to do with whether you had your money on him or not. He was just one of those horses that grabbed your heart, and you just wanted him to win every single time he went out there.
Let's hear from Chris Honor, his regular jockey, now a trainer. And I asked Chris about his time riding Cool Roxy, including on the 16th of March 2006, when Roxy ran at the Cheltenham Festival. Can you remember the first time you sat on Cool Roxy?
First time I sat him on was at Sandown. I never rode him at home before then. So it was at Sandown. It was very unauspicious start to our racing days, but he gave me something that day that he showed me that there might be something for the future.
And then 12 months later, in November 2002, you won on him for the first time at Fakenham. Yeah,
we won there. We'd had a few goes here and there, and he'd been fourth quite a few times. But I'm not saying he knew where he was that day, but as time went on, he got better and better around Fakenham. But it was nice to get his head in front, and everybody was happy on the day.
You won on him so many times at Fakenham. Did he give you a different feel at the Norfolk course?
Oh, 100%. Like I said before to people, and I don't mean to hinder or be ill of horses, but not the most intelligent of animals, but they have amazing memories. And he definitely knew where he was when he was at Fakenham, and he definitely knew where the winning line was. And then when you're riding him around there, as long as you were in sort of 4 or 5 lengths of the leader, jumping the ditch or the cross hurdle, you knew you were going to be pretty close to winning the race, because he'd pick up and go for you from jumping that wing down over the last, and generally finish with your head in front of him. No, he was great to ride around there.
Did the course suit him?
Oh, definitely, because he's not a big horse. He nipped around the bends. I don't know whether he could have found that sort of continuity with a track if he'd been somewhere else. I don't know. I think it worked well for the Blackmores, not too far away. It worked well because the prize money was always very, very good at Fakenham. He ended up winning 100 and something odd thousand in prize money, and for a horse that cost negligible amounts, he did incredibly well. Fakenham deserves more runners in my mind. I would go there far more often if I lived a bit closer. But their prize money is always second to none. The class of races that you're running in, and it's a great track. You're very well looked after when you go there. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it was Roxy's cup of tea, so we were happy to be there.
You must have sensed he was a crowd favourite, though, when you ran at Fakenham.
Oh, definitely. Obviously not straight away, but the more times he won round there, his notoriety became, more and more. People would, now since told me that they even came especially to come and see him, which is what racing's all about. I had lads in the weighing room, and they'd in jest tease me about going to Fakenham and riding Roxy, but pretty jealous to a certain degree. A horse I rode 70 times and won 11 races on him. You don't get that many chances. Not when, to a certain degree, a lesser jockey that I was, being part of a story as of Cool Roxy, as with Mr. Blackmore. I'm proud to be part of it, and I'm proud that that now this book that's come out, that my name's in there amongst the story that I find fascinating. Especially not just about racing, but the life that Mr. Blackmore's lived, and all that they got up to whilst training Mr. Blackmore, training Cool Roxy for Mr. Blackmore, and but there's some great stories in the book.
You also got to ride Cool Roxy at the Cheltenham Festival in 2006.
Yes, yeah, no, it was a special day, purely simply because it was my first ride down there. I think I can't remember how old I was now, but I didn't know if I was ever going to go back there, so I took time out that day to really take it in. To the point, I think when we were walking around down the start, there's however many, like 20 something odd runners, and I just took myself out and just looked back at the crowd, and he stopped and he pricked his ears, and you're looking back at 60,000 people. It was a pretty amazing sight. We had a great ride round that day. It's a different place to be riding at the festival. It's different to any other Cheltenham day. You go that much faster, that much harder. There's no call given. You're not going to be asking for a bit of room here and there. Like Paul Carberry and people like that, the proper jockeys. They were squeezing you up and asking, not giving you an inch. But Roxy held his own, and he ran a very, very creditable race. In what is definitely now has turned out to be a race where some very good horses have come from.
Yeah, you finished 9th of 24, and you're riding against A.P. McCoy, Ruby Walsh, Paul Carberry, Mick Fitzgerald.
Oh, definitely. It was a great day, and there's not many days that I remember vividly, but it is one of them. Don't get me wrong, you go there to want to win these things, but you have to be realistic. But he gave me a great spin round. I don't think we've been beaten, 10, 15 lengths, something like that. So you get the roar of the crowd, you get jumping the last, the roar of the crowd as you're coming down today. It's like nothing you will ever experience. It's like playing at Wembley or Twickenham in rugby. So that was our big thing, and I got to enjoy it on the horse that I owe a great deal to.
That must have been a special day when Roxy or Cool Roxy ran at the Cheltenham Festival, Aaron.
It was a great day. I remember I was lucky enough to be in the paddock beforehand with Alan and Pat, and he was 77 years old at the time, was Alan. And here he was coming up with this little horse who was a big outsider in the Patemps final at Cheltenham. And he wasn't expected to do anything. He actually ran really, really well. He was right up there throughout, up until about 2 hurdles from the end. And then finally, I think, a few younger legs and whatever overtook him. And he was sort of, he was brought home nicely. He finished 9th out of 24. But he was one of the outsiders of the party. So he ran really well. And it was just wonderful to see Alan and Pat there in the parade ring, legging up Chris Honor on Cool Roxy with all of the big name trainers from Britain and Ireland all around them, in a packed parade ring there at Cheltenham. It was a fabulous day out.
Yes, it was in the Patemps final, a listed race, and this is what trainer Alan Blackmore had to say about the day at Cheltenham.
It was good, but I think it was a bit of a mistake because it was a trip too far, and that hill finish put paid to Cool Roxy. He had been leading for quite a while, but the uphill for stronger, bigger horses overtook him. And I told Chris Honor, don't be hard on him. So because he knew he was tiring. He let him come home in his own time at the end. So he didn't come away feeling knackered. And anyway, it was lovely going to Cheltenham, you know what I mean? But I didn't want to go there again unless it was a 2-mile handicap rather than something like 2 3/4 miles. And the amateur rider races like with Kim Muir and all that were 4 miles. No way was I going to enter anything like that.
Cool Roxy's last race, Aaron, was at Fakenham in May 2011 under Jack Quinlan.
Yes, indeed. His last race came after he'd already been retired once. But he'd still, Alan had decided after retiring him, he decided to allow him a few runs in the point-to-point field with his regular work rider and groom, Emily Crossman, who looked after him for 10 years. Riding in point-to-point. So they ran 4 times and had a great deal of fun over the winter. And Alan decided that Roxy was still so keen to go that he would like to give him one last hurrah back at Fakenham. So he was 14 years old by this stage. So he wasn't expected to do anything, but it was a lovely opportunity for Jack Quinlan to ride him as well. And they came home 4th in the end, but they came home safely, which was the most important thing. And it was fabulous for Roxy to have another day out up at his favourite racecourse.
Alan was a successful trainer at Fakenham, though.
Hugely successful. He always used to like to take his horses there. It's a very, very fair track, but also you get such an amazing welcome, as you've detailed yourself in one of your excellent podcasts before. You get such a great welcome at Fakenham, and the both the staff there and the race goers really know their stuff, and it's a tremendous place to go racing. So Alan always used to take his horses there, from Cool Roxy, Flaming Cheek, occasionally Yours. All of the horses that he had, particularly in the latter part of his career, ran very, very regularly up at Fakenham.
Well, the jockeys seem to like riding for Alan, and again, we're going back to Chris Honor and Tabitha Worsley, who I think was the last jockey to ride a horse for Alan, to find out what it was like to ride for Alan Blackmore.
Mr. Blackmore and Pat Blackmore, they are the epitome of what racing is about in my mind. They do it for the love of the sport. They do it for they just do it for the pure and utter fun of being part of something. They treated their horses like they were, they're like children. They were loved, they were cared for, and they repaid them in spades. They coming back year after year, getting back Flaming Cheek from it's more than a career-ending injury that he had. and they got him back with the help of their son Chris, who was a vet. They were incredible people to ride for. They did great things with very limited resources, but their horses kept coming back and enjoying it and repeating year after year, their performance after performance, just doing it again and again for them. And not many people, not many trainers can do that. So, yes, they were permit trainers. Yes, they were small, but they proved it with Cool Roxy. They proved it with Flaming Cheek. They proved it with Occasionally Yours. That they knew how to do the job, and they did it very, very well.
What was it like to ride for Alan?
Oh, just brilliant. I say they're the nicest people to ride for. You'd always get there and Alan and Pat would be bickering away, but they just loved their horses. They did so much themselves, and just the easiest people, didn't tie you down too much, just said go out there and have fun. And you always would, because they always had such nice horses to ride. Any special moments when you rode for him? So my first winner over hurdles was actually for him at Fakenham on Occasionally Yours, who was probably 12 by that point. And I say it was amazing for me. And I say we went on and won another 3 after that. And I say it was just so much fun doing it with them.
And at Fakenham, did you get a different sense when you were riding for Alan at Fakenham?
Oh, everyone knows who they are. He can't get anywhere without someone stopping him and saying hello. And I say they're celebrities there, so if you're with them, you never get anywhere. But I say even when Cool Roxy, they opened all the bar and everything, I say it's the Fakenham is the Blackmores track.
I asked Alan what difference Chris Honor made to the Cool Roxy story.
We got on all so well together, He rode the horse well, and we all got on well together. It was just plain sailing, really. Yeah. Obviously, other riders have come along since with our other horses, like Mark Goldstein, Jack Quinlan, and Tabitha Worsley. They've all been very nice people. They're a joy to work with.
But that wasn't the last time that Cool Roxy went to Fakenham, was it, Aaron?
No, it wasn't. His following was such that the course decided that they would like to name their brand new owners and trainers bar in Roxy's honour, which was a lovely idea, and I know very much appreciated by Alan. So if you go to Fakenham now, and I urge everyone to go, you will see the Cool Roxy owners and trainers bar, which has lots of pictures of Roxy and Chris Honor, and also of Emily Crossman and Alan and Pat there. So it's a great venue now. And David Hunter had the idea of asking Emily, who was looking after Roxy then, to actually come up on the day to open the bar. So that was all marvellous. And you would expect in those circumstances that the horse would just stand very calmly by the side of the bar while someone else cut the tape. But oh no, not Alan Blackmore and Cool Roxy. So Emily took Roxy into the bar after David Hunter had asked her whether or not she thought it would be okay to walk in, turn him round and bring him out again. Emily said, absolutely, he'll even pour the pints if you ask him.
So what year was that when Cool Roxy went back to Fakenham?
That was 2015, so he was 18 at the time.
Now, I know off air that you weren't in the bar that day, but one person who was in the bar was Tabitha Worsley's mum, Georgie Howell, trainer. And this is what Georgie had to say about Cool Roxy's arrival in the Cool Roxy bar.
Yeah, I was there the day that Cool Roxy came out of the bar, and it was just the best thing. I think Tabitha was fairly new riding for the Blackmores, and so we didn't actually know them terribly well. Didn't particularly know the story, and more found out the story on that day. And this horse literally walked into the bar, came round, they put the ribbon across it, and then it came out, cut the ribbon, and the horse walked out the bar. And it was just amazing. It was absolutely brilliant. I've never seen anything quite like it.
And that bar, Aaron, is the owners and trainers bar.
It is indeed. It is indeed. The owners and trainer, the Cool Roxy Owners and Trainers Bar in pride of place, right in the centre of Fakenham Racecourse.
When did then Alan retire as a trainer, and how old was he when he retired?
He retired at the age of 90 in 2019. His last runner, quite rightly too, was at Fakenham. It was a horse called Cocker. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. He was pulled up. He was 100-1. But it was still the right venue, I think, for Alan to have his final runner. And at the age of 90, he was officially Britain's oldest registered trainer at the time. So it was a long way from his beginnings, with those pointers effectively running out of his back garden 40 odd years later. And he was able to retire as the nation's oldest official trainer, which was marvellous.
And you've guessed it, I've now got a clip from Alan, who spoke about why he stopped training and the difference that training horses and Cool Roxy made to his life. How much do you miss training?
A lot. But you see, our son, who was a brilliant vet, he died 2.5 years ago. And when we knew 4 years ago that he got terminal bone marrow cancer, which is a very slow and painful death, we packed up straight away, found good homes for horses. We decided we couldn't go on without him.
What difference did Cool Roxy and training horses make to your life?
I think it gave us real pleasure in feeling we're doing something well worthwhile. It was worthwhile getting up at 6:30 every morning, mucking out the horses, because we felt we were, making our lives meaning something. We were getting near to retirement age of 65, and I was so pleased we had these horses. And my wife and I used to get up at 6:30 in the winter, in the morning, to muck them out and give them hay and water. Then we'd come down to the house and have breakfast and then go back up again by 9:30 because the work riders would be coming. Well, a work rider.
So it must have been a difficult time for Alan when he decided to retire.
Yes, absolutely. His decision to retire really was less to do with his own age, because he was still absolutely remarkable at the age of 90. But it was due to a sad reason. His oldest son, Christopher, contracted cancer and was told that he only had a couple of years left to live. And Christopher had been a huge part of the Blackmores story because he was actually an equine vet, and he had been enormously important to Alan in being able to help him find the right horses and then to look after those horses throughout his training career. So when he learned of Christopher's diagnosis, he decided it was only right for him to actually pack up training.
But he still likes to go to the races, a little bit weather dependent, but when you're 95, you can understand that.
Yeah, I think that's an acceptable reason. If it's absolutely chucking it down, he might not want to venture all the way up to Fakenham. Or Sandown or Huntingdon or any of the other places he might like to go to. But you will definitely continue to see Alan Blackmore at the races, that I can assure you.
And in this short clip, you'll hear that Alan is intending to go to Fakenham on Friday, the 16th of February.
Oh, yes, we're going to go on February the 16th, definitely. And, yes, I'll keep going. As long as I can keep driving, I'll keep going. And to Huntingdon and to Sandown or whatever. But it's got to be good weather. If the forecast is rain all day, I'm not going to go. I'll sit at home and watch it on television. But if it's half decent weather, I'll go there.
We're drawing to a close in the podcast now, Aaron. We've not actually mentioned much about the book directly, the Fakenham Favourite. How did you come to write the book?
Well, I'd had this idea for a couple of years that the story of Alan and Pat Blackmore and Cool Roxy was one that deserved to be told. I've always felt that national hunt racing in particular tends to throw up some of the most remarkable human and equine stories. And my view, having known Alan and Pat for nearly 20 years, was that this was one of those stories that really needed to get out there. It tells of a small trainer up against the big boys who overcame the most appalling tragedy, because as well as losing Christopher, Alan and Pat had also lost their younger son, Michael, who was killed actually in a race at Market Raisin in 1986 while riding one of their own horses. So I think to have been able to overcome and deal with adversity like that, and to go on to then have another 30 years in racing, 30 years that was enormously successful in so many ways, and was to bring both them and many others so many happy moments. I really felt that combined with the story of Roxy, a small horse who, as we've heard, ran his heart out every single time he ran, 77 times over 10 years, never ran a bad race. And I think that it's a story that's both heartbreaking and heartwarming, but above all, a story that had to be told, and a story that two very remarkable people deserve to have out there in the public domain.
Well, I'd agree with that, Aaron. I've read the book, recommend it. It's a very easy read. It, as you say, there's tragedy and also glory with Cool Roxy, and thank goodness that Alan didn't buy a fridge that morning at Newmarket. Absolutely.
I don't think we would have been able to do this podcast. I don't think I would have been able to write the book, and I don't think we would have had so much joy, fun, and happiness out of a fridge, however good, however expensive it might have been.
Well, we've got one more clip from Alan, and you're going to be blushing now, and this is what Alan thought of the Fakenham Favourite.
Well, I thought it was very good. I thought it was easy reading and interesting.
You've known Aaron a long time?
Yes. Well, he's often been at the races, hanging around. We've just sort of, I don't know how we've got together, but, we used to see him at Fakenham and other courses like Huntingdon and such like, or Sandown. I can't explain it. It just, we got on well together, that's all.
He was the perfect person to write the book.
I thought, yes, he was, yeah. But it's light-hearted, it's not boring. And everybody that's had this book has all said, oh, it's lovely, to easy read and well produced,
How have sales been going so far?
Been very, very good so far. The original launch date was the date that racing at Fakenham was called off as the horses were in the parade ring for the first race. So that was an opportunity where we didn't get a chance to sell as many as we would have hoped to had the racing been on. But we've had an awful lot of good support so far, some fabulous comments and responses to the book. And sales, bearing in mind we haven't actually been able to sell it properly on the racecourse yet, are way ahead of where my expectations would have been. So we're going back to Fakenham on Friday the 16th of February, and we hope to be able to take it to many more people then.
And you'll be there that day to sign copies?
I'll be there today. I'll be there on the day. Very happy to sign copies for anybody who would like a signed copy. Alan will be with me. He will be doing the same. So we hope to see as many people as possible there.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for being on the Paddock and the Pavilion, telling the story of Alan Blackmore, the Blackmores, Cool Roxy, and the fridge.
Thanks very much, Stephen. It's been a huge pleasure.
And finally, the best of luck with the Fakenham Favourite, the book.
Thank you very much indeed. For anyone, if I may, for anyone who can't get to Fakenham on the 16th of February, you can also order copies directly from my website, which is aarongransby.com.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I'll put that in the podcast bio as well.
Thanks very much indeed, Stephen.
Sports Social Podcast Network.